terror. To all of us, it remains a mystery. What is it? Who built it? And why? Now, after 20 years of research, a leading Egyptologist believes he has pieced together clues that lead him to the Sphinx's creator. A great pharaoh that history has forgotten. He has unwrapped the story behind the most mysterious icon of the ancient world.
Such a powerful image that every time you look at the Sphinx, you see new things.
His new thinking has taken him on a journey to confront accepted history and finally to solve the world's most famous enigma. An identity lost, a mystery unraveled, the Great Sphinx revealed. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt would astound the world with their incredible monuments. We know who built the vast pyramids at Giza and how they constructed forests of stone. But the most famous of all their creations remains a mystery. The Sphinx. 4,500 years ago, in the old kingdom of ancient Egypt, a pharaoh ordered the building of an extraordinary monument. His craftsmen set to work on the Giza plateau outside today's Cairo. They were to create a statue which would become the strangest icon on Earth. The story of this remarkable pharaoh was lost through the slip of a pen in the 1930s, when an archaeologist simply wrote him out of history. But the statue this pharaoh created has survived. Today it stands beside the greatest of the pyramids, making the Giza Plateau the most famous landmark in Egypt. At 20 meters high and 80 meters long, the Sphinx remains the largest single stone statue in the world. It is also the biggest mystery. Now, Egyptologist Vasil Dobrev believes he's found the answers. His research has taken him 20 years. After he moved to Cairo, the Sphinx became his life. He was immediately enchanted by its strange shape.
I get fascinated by this combination of an animal body and a human face.
The Sphinx is one of the most studied monuments. Yet Vasil wasn't convinced by any of the accepted archaeological explanations as to who created it or whose face it bears.
It is incredible. The most important image of Egypt, the Sphinx, and we just cannot say who it was with certainty. And then I said to myself, there is something to do here. It's an open door.
So Vasil set out to re-examine the evidence. He picked his way across the Giza Plateau. Here lie the tombs of the pharaohs and their families. Archaeologists have labeled every one of them, making this one of the most studied sites on Earth. But despite their findings, Vasil has managed to unearth new evidence which could overturn accepted history and lead him to the Sphinx's creator. But the clues haven't always been easy to follow. False trails and dead ends hide the footsteps of the past. Over 4,000 years of history have created blind alleys. And the archaeology around the Sphinx has become a labyrinth of conflicting ideas. Vasil's journey begins with the earliest recorded mention of the Sphinx. It's found on a curious stone tablet known as the Dream Stela, which lies between its paws. It was inscribed, and it was to play a major role in creating the Sphinx's dark mythology. It tells the story of a young prince called Thutmose, who went hunting on the Giza Plateau. By this time, the power in Egypt had long since moved away from Giza. The once glorious Sphinx had been left exposed to the ravages of the desert and had become buried up to its neck in sand. According to the stela, Prince Thutmose rested beneath the stone giant to shelter from the midday sun. He fell asleep and had a dream, in which he claimed that the Sphinx spoke to him, telling him that if he cleared away the sand from its paws, he would become king. The stela claims that he did as the Sphinx requested and removed the sand. But in reality, this was a golden opportunity for Thutmose to be remembered alongside the great statue and to glorify his name forever. So he concocted the whole story upon the stela. Vasil is quite sure its function was self-promotion.
The text starts with a date. It mentions the first year of the reign of Thutmose IV. So for us, the message is clear. This is pure propaganda. He is already a king, and then describes the story.
Although this account was pure fiction, the tablet also mentioned the name of another pharaoh, Khafre. Ever since his name was first deciphered, archaeologists have believed that Khafre was the creator of the Sphinx.
And the first impression and the first thing that was noticed, that behind the Sphinx you see the pyramid of Khafre. And quite naturally, the idea came that if the Sphinx was built on almost the same line with the pyramid of Khafre, it has to be Khafre.
Khafre was one of the greatest builders at Giza. His pyramid stands near his father's Great Pyramid and is just as large. In addition, Khafre built 2 temples, and their remains are sited immediately in front of the Sphinx.
So the idea was clear, like everybody, I thought. The Sphinx has to be Khafre.
But when Vasil studied the layout, he could see that Khafre's causeway connecting his pyramid to his temple was built round the Sphinx.
I have noticed very quickly that Khafre avoided the Sphinx with his causeway. It is quite clear when he built his monument, the Sphinx was already here.
This was enough for Vasil to doubt that Khafre had built the Sphinx. He also doubted that it actually represented Khafre.
If it had to represent Khafre, we have a problem. Because on all the statues of Khafre, he is represented with a beard. So why should his biggest statue would be without a beard? It doesn't fit. So it is a main argument to say that this, when people try to put the face of Khafre and one next to the Sphinx's faces, it doesn't work. I mean, it just doesn't fit. The characteristics are different.
So Khafre, the pharaoh historians have always believed built the Sphinx, was eliminated from Vasil's investigation. Now, he was about to discover that a new solution was staring him in the face. But to find it, he was going to have to think like an ancient Egyptian. And if he was right, he could turn history on its head. Vasil Dobrev's search to find the creator of the Sphinx has led him to eliminate Khafre, the pharaoh believed by many to have built it. Now Vasil is revisiting the Giza plateau to look at the other possibilities. Could it be that the Sphinx belonged to Khafre's father, Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid? Khufu is one of the most infamous pharaohs. He was the first pharaoh to build at Giza. His Great Pyramid remains the largest stone structure of all time and is a wonder of the ancient world. So if Khufu wielded such power, why couldn't he have built the Sphinx as well?
I tried to imagine what it was like to see the Sphinx as an ancient Egyptian. And a completely different geography of the site appears. Today, when we visit the Sphinx, we approach it from the east, coming from Cairo. So, when we visit the Sphinx, we see it face on, and behind naturally comes the pyramid of Khafre. So they seem belonging one to the other. But I try to imagine how it would have been at the time of the pharaohs. Did they approach from here? And most probably they were coming from the south, or over there.
This was because the Giza plateau was once very different. There was a vast network of waterways. Just 100 yards below the Sphinx stood a harbor connected to canals. They were created to bring in stone for the building of the Great Pyramid. At this time, the other pyramids hadn't yet been built. One of the canals went to the Old Kingdom capital, later called Memphis, which lay to the south. So it was from this direction that the kings of the Old Kingdom would approach Giza.
When we approach the Sphinx from the south, we don't see it face on. We see it in profile. And the pyramid behind it is not anymore the pyramid of Khafre, but it is the pyramid of Khufu.
And profile was how the ancient Egyptians saw their world. Their hieroglyphics and even their portraits were all twisted into profile.
Here we have a panel from the 3rd dynasty, Old Kingdom. The artist sculpted the face in profile while his shoulders are in frontal view. And we also see the feet are depicted in profile view.
We don't know whether the Sphinx was conceived of in profile, but viewed from this angle, it certainly complements Khufu's pyramid. But does the Sphinx bear Khufu's face? This is the only known statue of him, a small reminder of the pharaoh who built the biggest pyramid of all. Despite the difference of scale, there do appear to be similarities.
Khufu's face on the small statuette, for example, we see his chin he has, very square chin. The Sphinx has the same feature. It is a characteristic feature of Khufu.
It's hard to make an accurate comparison because the Sphinx has been so badly damaged.
The face actually didn't look at all as it was at the beginning because it is heavily destroyed. The nose is missing, the eyes are touched, the mouth is destroyed, the ears are half destroyed.
The destruction began after Thutmose cleared away the sand. The Sphinx was then left for another 1,000 years and became covered once again. But it was such a provocative image, it could never escape attention. It was when the Greeks arrived in Egypt that the real damage began. Inspired by the stone giant, they named it the Sphinx and came up with their own mythological beast. Their Sphinx was an evil female creature, and from that moment, the Egyptian original became confused with the Greek creation. For the Sphinx, this would spell disaster. By Western myth, that it was seen as a pagan symbol, and an Arab sheikh set out to deface it. But he only succeeded in breaking away its nose. It was as if the all-seeing Sphinx had secret powers after all. This attracted treasure hunters in search of secret chambers. Their misguided attempts only added to the damage. But the Sphinx would survive them all.
When you cannot destroy an image, you start to fear it. So that's why they have called him Abu el-Hol, Father of the Terror. And from that moment, legends start to surround the Sphinx.
By the 20th century, showing scant respect for ancient monuments, British soldiers were using the Sphinx for target practice. Besides being damaged, the Sphinx had also been heavily restored. It's now hard to imagine that it was ever carved from one piece of natural rock, and equally hard to work out what is original and what is not. Theorists in search of fantasy and secret chambers are still attracted by random shafts like this, which were in fact often cut by tomb builders, little knowing that beneath the sand lay the Sphinx's body. The most confusing find made here has been the remains of a giant stone beard. Vassal has already established that Khufu was never depicted with one. So if this beard is genuine, it could present his theory with a serious problem. Fragments of this beard survive in the Cairo Museum. Having fitted the pieces together, Vassal doubts that they were carved at the same time as the Sphinx.
This is what we call the divine beard, with the characteristic zigzag pattern. These are just a few fragments of a huge beard found at the site of the Sphinx. But the question is, did the Sphinx always have a beard, or was it added later?
If the Sphinx's beard had been carved in one piece from the same rock as its face, the beard would have damaged the chin when it broke away. But there are no signs of such a break. All Sphinxes which once did have beards show signs of a rough fracture.
This is a Sphinx with a beard originally, because the beard was cut together with the chin out of the same stone. So when you cut it off, you see the traces. In the Great Sphinx of Giza, if there was a beard from the original statue, you would have seen the traces of the beard.
This leads Vassal to conclude that the Sphinx's beard was a later addition. His investigation hasn't unearthed a single beard from the time of the Sphinx to match the pattern. He's only been able to match the Zeta period, the New Kingdom, 1,000 years after the Sphinx was built. But this is where Vassal has found new evidence. Until now, this small statue was the only commonly acknowledged representation of Khufu. But through extensive research, Vassal discovered other depictions of Khufu that have never been closely studied. They add further weight to his argument.
Out of the 7-8 images known of the face of Khufu, not a single one has a beard. And the Sphinx doesn't have a beard. So there are great chances that it represents Khufu.
Vassal's last clue, which points to Khufu, is the nemes, the striped headdress with a distinctive pattern.
The nemes of the Sphinx is pleated. 2 small pleats and 1 large, repeated one after the other. This type of nemes was used for at least one statue of Khufu.
After more than 2 decades of painstaking research, the profile view, the facial features, the lack of a beard, and the markings on the nemes have all convinced Vassal that the Sphinx represents the pharaoh Khufu. But extraordinarily, he doesn't believe that Khufu built it. Instead, he claims it was created by a pharaoh we know very little about, a pharaoh who was written out of history. His name was Djedefre, the son of Khufu. Until now, no Egyptologist has ever suggested that he built the Sphinx.
I'm proposing, well, this is actually I think it's the first time it has been proposed, that the Sphinx has been built after the death of Khufu by his son, Djedefre, that succeeded him immediately.
Vassal believes that Djedefre inherited a broken nation. His solution was to build the most powerful image ever known. Its unrelenting gaze would help restore control and royal power after the reign of his father. Khufu's funeral marked the end of an era. A powerful and ruthless pharaoh, Khufu constructed the largest pyramid of all time, a wonder of the ancient world. For Djedefre, this was a hard act to follow. And it wasn't made any easier by his father's reputation. The Great Pyramid took over 20 years of back-breaking labor to complete. And this followed the exhausting building projects of Khufu's own father. Maybe after more than half a century of building, the morale of the country was broken.
Finishing the pyramid of Khufu was the hardest job that the Egyptians have ever done. We can imagine that at the end, there could have been quite a lot of people that didn't like the king anymore.
But despite these problems, Djedefre went on to become a visionary pharaoh. Vassal has discovered that Djedefre's influence would transform the Giza Plateau. But the story of his remarkable reign has always been overlooked, until now. It was believed that under the dark cloud of a family rift, Djedefre moved away from Giza, turning his back upon his family. But Vassal's research shows otherwise.
I have pieced together some evidence that shows clearly that the presence of Djedefre in Giza was quite important. And this evidence was known, but unfortunately not really interpreted.
The reason was that in the 1930s, respected archaeologist George Reisner published his masterwork on the Giza Plateau. He made unsubstantiated claims about the life of Djedefre that masqueraded as facts. But Vassal is confident he can now set the record straight.
George Reisner was an American archaeologist who excavated the Giza Plateau, and his archaeological methods became a standard. And when he arrived to the reign of Djedefre, he in fact created a story around the reign of Djedefre.
Reisner wrote that Djedefre came from a Libyan branch of the family and wasn't the true heir. He believed that the title belonged to his older brother, Kawab. Reisner thought that Djedefre had tried to murder Kawab in order to take the throne.
We have absolutely no evidence to support this. But it was written in a very famous book. And slowly, it became the rule. Djedefre the bad one, Kawab the poor one.
Reisner turned this family saga into history. He cast Djedefre as the plotter and schemer. Reisner claimed that when the moment was right, he murdered his older brother Kawab to take the throne. And this explained why Djedefre hadn't built his tomb at Giza, because he had fallen out with his family after the murder of his brother. But beside Khufu's Great Pyramid lies the Royal Cemetery, a labyrinth of tombs. And here, Vassil's investigation takes us to the evidence to show that Reisner was wrong.
This is the best image that we have of Prince Kawab, a son of Khufu and consequently Djedefre's brother. This is the man who was allegedly murdered by Djedefre. But inside this tomb we have evidence that disproves this. And here it is. This is a list of the estates donating offerings to Kawab's daughter. And one of them bears the cartouche of Djedefre. If Djedefre was really the murderer of her father, why would his name be here?
Vassil now begins to explore Djedefre's reign and what he really did. He discovers that Djedefre was a visionary builder who, far from abandoning his family, set out to strengthen it and to reclaim the support of the nation. One of his extraordinary structures is high up at Abu Roash, 6 miles from Giza. This site ensured his monument stood even higher than his father's pyramid. But building it didn't break the back of the country.
Abu Roash, one of Egypt's highest natural sites, almost at the same level as the top of the Great Pyramid.
Until now, archaeologists have thought that this was a pyramid. But Vassil is the first to suggest that Djedefre, son of the sun god, actually built a solar temple. Because of the location, the top of the monument would have been closer to the sun than almost anywhere else in Egypt. Inside, its design was inventive. For the first time, the structure didn't require hauling heavy stones uphill.
This monument here in Abu Roash has been cut in the mountain, an enormous ramp going down. Instead of hauling up these heavy granite stones, Djedefre brought the stones down.
Djedefre's ramp was so effective that later pharaohs adopted the design.
After Khufu's pyramid, all the monuments, all the pyramids will have their chambers under, in the rock.
But if this was Djedefre's temple, where was his pyramid tomb? It set Vassil's mind ticking. He re-examined some graffiti discovered at a site called Zawiat El Arian. And Vassil came across the name of Djedefre, written during the 2nd year of his reign. Vassil is the first to suggest that this was the site of Djedefre's pyramid. The surviving lower courses are as large as those of his father's Great Pyramid. Howard Hawks filmed them for his Hollywood epic. But wasn't Djedefre turning his back on his family at Giza, just like George Reisner thought?
In fact, Djedefre is quite a traditional king. He did exactly what his grandfather did, and his father. He built a monument on a new site, as they did.
Far from abandoning Giza, Djedefre then returned there to build the greatest of all his monuments, the Sphinx. But in an age before iron tools, how was the world's largest single stone sculpture actually built? No one will ever know who first thought of carving the Sphinx. But with its creation, Djedefre would transform the Giza Plateau. No stones would need to be quarried, no ramps constructed, no gangs would be needed to pull sledges. Instead, the raw stone was right there. One piece of limestone growing out of the bedrock would be transformed into the giant statue. The site had already been heavily quarried. Khufu had taken away stones to build the Great Pyramid and left a large piece of rock standing straight up in a flat basin. For Djedefre, this was an opportunity to create something exceptional.
This was the first big statue. We are in a period of big things. They just have built the biggest pyramid, and they built the biggest statue. The two biggest monuments of Egypt are there, one next to the other.
But the Sphinx wasn't going to be merely self-aggrandizement on a large scale. What makes it so exceptional is that the statue had a difficult task to perform. Never in the history of sculpture has a single statue had to achieve so much. The reason was that pharaohs believed that they lived on forever after death. But this continuing life was only possible if their support on earth remained strong. Djedefre was all too aware that his father's power had weakened towards the end of his life. Even during Khufu's reign, his mother's tomb had been raided, and this had been the very worst thing that could have happened. It made a mockery of everything they believed in.
If there is no respect, there is chaos. Everything will collapse. This is the main idea of ancient Egypt, the life after death.
So the future of the ancient Egyptian civilization now lay in Djedefre's hands. He had to ensure that his father's power was reinstated at Giza to safeguard his own support on Earth.
Creating such an important, such an enormous image of Khufu, the god, the dead king, will improve his image and also will improve the image of the new king. So I think that this could be an explanation why the Sphinx was built.
Djedefre needed to create an image that would strike awe into all who saw it. The result was not only big, but supremely powerful. Its impact remains unsurpassed to this day. Vassal has invited Glyn Williams, head of sculpture at the Royal College of Art, to help him understand how it was carved. This is the first time he has seen the Sphinx.
It's a beautiful, beautiful, simple, an enormous size. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anything this sort of size as a single object. So I'm knocked sideways. I could stay here all day actually and just do it. I mean, it's a wonderful experience. Saying it's lovely would be so inadequate. I mean, in fact, most words are inadequate for it. I mean, all one can do is feast your eyes on it.
In order to try and understand the skills of the ancient Egyptians, Vassal has given Glyn a square-meter block of the same limestone to carve the Sphinx's face.
Incredible. It looks soft and chalky, and it's amazing. Let's try it, just to see what it's like. Let's just take oh yes. That's really soft, beautiful. Oh, yes. Have that done by tea time.
Like the ancient Egyptian craftsman, Glyn has to mark the outline to figure out which sections of stone to cut away.
In carving, you have to think in reverse. You have to take away all the stuff that's not there. The nose has to be left, a piece of stone left for the forehead, a piece of stone left for the chin. It's like emptying a bath of water around an object. As the water goes out, it leaves the prominent bits up.
Before he started carving, Glyn made a small model to work from.
I find it very useful to have a maquette which you can simply put some basic measurements on and knock off the bits of stone that you know you don't want. I don't know whether the Egyptians would have done something similar. It's likely they may have done, particularly working on a scale like this.
No sculpture of this scale had ever been attempted before. And unlike other statues where stone was specially chosen, here the masons had to use what lay in front of them. There was no room for error. It would be a daunting challenge today, but in the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt, the stonemasons didn't even have iron tools. So how did they do it? Dennis Stocks has made a study of ancient Egyptian tools and has recreated them.
These are copper chisels that would have been used to cut out the Great Sphinx. This one is a thicker chisel, but it still has a sharp edge to it, which would remain like that even after a lot of work cutting out the stone.
The copper chisels were continually resharpened in a production line, so that the stonemasons were constantly supplied. Copper tools were simply hammered on each edge until they were sharp. Ancient Egyptians were highly experienced organizers. Although the Sphinx was the largest stone statue ever made, it required far fewer workers than pyramids.
Well, one could imagine the state itself being a huge machine which controlled workers at every level, starting off with Pharaoh himself and then passing his instructions down to the Grand Vizier, then to other viziers below, who then instructed foremen and then incorporated draft workers. There were people having to shovel all the debris away, all the shards of limestone that were showering down onto the site. Then the scaffolding had to be put in position, people using cord in order to lash those together. Having roughed it out, the master draftsman now can see places that now need more refinement.
We've got in here, and the soft piece of stone that I was beginning to test out yesterday is about 4 inches here. And beyond that 4 inches, we've got really good limestone, but it's harder. So my notion that I would be finished in no time at all has gone out of the window. It does show that this supposed soft limestone is in fact good quality outdoor type of sculpture stone. There is a possibility, if one isn't careful, that the soft stone comes away from the hard stone, that there will be some sort of shelling happening at the join of the soft to the hard. So we've got to be careful with that. We don't want to lose bits of the face.
The workmen never knew if there were weaknesses hidden in the rock. Tragedy could strike at any moment. As they worked downwards, the quality of the limestone deteriorated. And as they carved the hindquarters, they encountered a fissure. This may explain why the Sphinx is so elongated. Perhaps they carved on past the problem in order to get back to good rock and complete the rear of the Sphinx. Vassal has investigated this theory with geologist Colin Reeder.
The main fissure runs right along the floor of the enclosure and through the pores and the rear part of the body of the Sphinx. People have suggested that it was the presence of this fissure cutting through the limestone that affected the proportions of the Sphinx.
The site of the Sphinx is known to have been the remains of Khufu's quarry, left over from when he built his Great Pyramid 4,500 years ago. But because mythology is so intoxicating, some geologists have claimed that the Sphinx dates back as early as 30,000 years ago, long before any known civilization on Earth. The evidence for their wild claim was that the rocks would have needed 30,000 years to become so eroded. But Colin Reeder disagrees. He believes that 4,000 years would have been easily long enough.
These heavily eroded rocks, these rocks with a rounded appearance, they don't need 36,000 or even 10,000 years worth of rainfall to explain these features.
Water running off the plateau is just one of many factors here that could easily weather these rocks in just a few thousand years.
You've got abrasion by sand in the higher parts. Chemical weathering is going to be quite an active agent here. The effects of runoff, periodic runoff, all these processes would have combined to produce this scale of weathering.
Vassal is satisfied by the geological evidence. There is nothing it has offered up that deflects his belief that the Sphinx was built during the reign of Djedefre, around 4,500 years ago. He believes that he built it to display his power as the son of the most revered god, the sun god Ra.
From the beginning of his reign, Djedefre searched for stability, because what does his name mean? Djedefre means I'm the son of Re. And this is extremely strong. From an ideological point of view, the idea was set up. Now we need to show, to act. And maybe the first act of this theoretical idea was building the Sphinx.
As the first pharaoh to call himself the son of the sun god, the Sphinx was Djedefre's ultimate symbol of power. The lion symbolized the sun. The Sphinx also represented his father Khufu as a god. Only when pharaohs died did they become divine. Because of this, Vassal is convinced that Khufu could never have built the Sphinx for himself. The fusion of these ideas in the form of the Sphinx would ensure Djedefre's success in this world and the next. While the Sphinx restored Khufu's power on Earth, Vassal claims that Djedefre also planned to help his father in the afterlife. To do this, Djedefre came up with another extraordinary invention. He ordered the construction of 2 enormous boats. Vassal believes they are unique in Egyptian history because they were never assembled. Their parts were laid out like a giant kit. Then Djedefre had 2 deep pits dug beside his father's Great Pyramid, and into these the boats were lowered.
The fact that Djedefre built these boat pits and put the boats in pieces shows that he wanted to help his father, his dead father, in the afterlife.
All the parts rife. Khufu would be able to sail on the celestial Nile with Ra, the sun god. After 4,500 years, the boat components have survived. One of the boats is in perfect condition and has been assembled. After Djedefre buried the boat parts, the pits were covered. Then the Great Pyramid's enclosure wall was completed, covering the hidden pits. The boats were so well hidden that they weren't found until 1955. Archaeologists discovered them beneath 42 stone blocks, each weighing 20 tons. These were covered in writing, which Vassal has studied.
We have on the stones that cover the boat pits dates and the names of Djedefre. And one of the dates is speaking about the 11th year of the reign of Djedefre, and most people overlooked this evidence.
Amongst the graffiti was found this symbol of 3 falcons which Djedefre adopted as his crest. It's significant because it underlines Djedefre's loyalty to his family lineage. His father Khufu had 2 falcons, and his father before him 1 falcon. While the boats would protect Khufu in the afterlife, it was the Sphinx that would look after him on Earth. But to Vassal, it seemed unlikely that the Egyptians would have attempted to build a Sphinx for the very first time on such a scale. So he began to investigate whether there had been Sphinxes before.
We could not trace when the idea of a Sphinx started, but what we know is that during the reign of Djedefre, Sphinxes existed.
Djedefre had a liking for sculpture, and the royal workshops were kept busy during his reign. Up until Djedefre, Old Kingdom sculpture had been built on a small scale. It was designed for royal tombs. Often it was only displayed in special rooms. Statues were usually seated. Sculptors paid little attention to their backs, since they were almost always set against the wall. Vassal has discovered that Djedefre was fascinated by stone. He's found the quarry where Djedefre, as the son of the sun god, would collect the rare diorite rock prized for its golden glow. And this has led Vassal to a sculpture which shows that the Great Sphinx may not have been the first. Beside Djedefre's solar temple at Abu Roash, a remarkable find was made. From diorite stone may well be the very first Sphinx. At the back, where it's broken, Vassal believes that it was once attached to an animal body. And another Sphinx has been discovered, this time female, possibly of Djedefre's wife.
Beautiful piece.
It is.
It's the first time I see it.
Really?
Yes.
Very little is known about this Sphinx, and it creates great debate amongst Egyptologists. But it's a further indication that Sphinxes were being made during Djedefre's reign. They might even have been prototypes for the Great Sphinx itself, where the carving reaches perfection. Glyn Williams has discovered that their sculpting skills were highly advanced.
There are beautiful transitions in the actual carving of the Sphinx's head between one form, the way it runs into another, is absolutely beautiful. It's ever so sophisticated. It's one of the best bits of transitional form making that I've seen.
Djedefre's craftsmen might have carved Sphinxes on a small scale, but a sculpture of this size presented a whole new set of problems.
Just the logistics of that size, dealing with scaffolding, a lot of people working, which would have slowed down the process, where you have to make sure that the symmetry really worked, and the form here on this side is exactly the same movement and swelling as the form on that side. Everything works in accordance, and then you've got the very accurate and big decorative stripes, which would have taken some cutting on a large scale. And then, of course, it was coloured.
Today, we see the Sphinx in plain stone. But in ancient Egypt, all statues were painted. To their eyes, it would have looked very different.
The face was red, definitely. The nemes was painted with colors. I can imagine that actually this could look like quite a kitschy image, but our harmony was not the same like the Egyptian harmony.
The Sphinx might have had dark green or olive green eyes. The whole face was a reddish brown, and the nemes had blue and gold stripes. This striking image would become a landmark in ancient Egyptian history.
The Sphinx brought such strong and powerful ideas that stayed for eternity, and Djedefre gave to Giza a new face.
When Djedefre became pharaoh, he faced an enormous challenge. He knew that he'd inherited a weak and disillusioned country from his father. But his innovative reign would lay the foundations of the future. When Djedefre died, his pyramid and temple were left unfinished. But his hidden boat pits survived, and his great Sphinx ensured that his family would prosper at Giza for generations to come. His half-brother Khafre succeeded him as pharaoh. Khafre stayed at Giza and built his pyramid behind the Sphinx.
And not only he did this, but he increased, he added a temple, he added elements to make it more powerful.
And royal power at Giza was so strengthened that Khafre's son would build his own pyramid on the plateau, completing the unmistakable trio of pyramids we recognize as Giza. Yet it was Djedefre, the pharaoh who made all this possible, the pharaoh once believed to have turned his back on Giza, who created the most extraordinary monument of all.
When you take the evidence and piece it all together, it appears that Djedefre, far from being an insignificant king, he appears to be a mastermind of the Giza plateau.
As more archaeological finds come to light, perhaps one day Vassal's research will allow Djedefre to attain his true place in history and be remembered as the pharaoh who created the Sphinx, the greatest statue on earth.
America's Finest next on 5. The CSI team get involved when a woman appears to have drowned in the desert. That's at 10 after the Miami investigators do their stuff. Next.